Welcome to A Race of Your Own. I'm Virgie Rodriguez, where we have discussions around how inspiration leads to resilience. And today's guest has a ton of points and things I need to cover, but I'm loving it. I'm really excited. I hope I can get it all in. She has been a community organizer and educator who is running for the Assembly District 57 for South Los Angeles. She's been endorsed by local and state leaders, one of them currently being the City of Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, and she advocates for social justice, equity, and opportunity for her district. She's a first generation born here in the United States. She is the first in her family to earn a college degree, graduating from UCLA, my alma mater, and Harvard. Yay, Bruin, go Bruins. And after she went to college, she returned back to South Los Angeles to teach and motivate young people. She started working as a youth organizer at Community Coalition and still works closely with them today. Welcome, Sade Elhawary.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yay! I'm excited to have you. There's so much to cover. And I mean, just to start off, you are just your story, who you are, what you do. You really are one of those people that like walks that walk.
Thank you.
Right? And a lot of what I talk about here is about purpose. And so I'm really excited to have you. And just, I don't even know where to start because there's so much and I want to cover all of it. But, you know, wherever you'd like to start with either one of the points I touched upon or whatever.
I'll just start with, I love that you said purpose. I think that recently I was talking to someone about, you know, what it means when we truly are and step into our purpose and how it feels so aligned with, you know, what we were meant to do here. And I'm really grateful because I always feel like I've been invested in my passions and I've been pulled in these different directions that allowed me to do work in my community, for my community, with my folks. And to now be running for office it wasn't in my kind of understanding of what I would do in my future, but now that it's happening, I'm like, oh, this is absolutely where I'm supposed to be, you know? And that feels incredible as someone who grew up not thinking that I could, you know, one day run for office, right? We always talk about like, we want little kids to know that they can become president, right? And it just feels so exciting to understand and recognize that, you know, being able to be a woman of color with my background, a daughter of immigrants, from LA, born and raised here, and then to be able to now do this work and really represent my community in this way is dope. So I just feel grateful, and I feel like that's what you're doing. Like, to really be in our purpose, I think speaks volumes, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and it feels good to see somebody, you know, so young, you know, not that I'm much older. We talked about this already before, but so young and so clear. Like, you're very clear, but you also are doing the work. You're in your community. People know you in your community for the work that you do. Can you expand a little bit on Community Coalition and like the work that you've done there?
Yeah, of course. So Community Coalition is an organization that's incredible. It's a nonprofit that was founded by now Mayor Karen Bass over 35 years ago now, almost 35 years ago. And it was founded because Mayor Bass at the time worked in an emergency room as a physician's assistant. And a lot of what was going on at that time during the crack cocaine epidemic was really impacting our community in all ways, and especially the Black community. It was really ravaging our community. And a part of that looked like both in terms of violence, in terms of the addiction, and really even for some of our young, you know, some of our parents who were becoming, you know, really addicted, that were then passing that on to their children, right? And for a lot of pregnant women. And then we saw what that meant in terms of the foster care system, all these things. And Mayor Bass said, look, we can't just keep throwing away our community members and locking them up because they're addicted. This is a public health crisis. Now, years later, when people are addicted to opioids, we do something about it that's humane. But back then, the Community Coalition was really a group of folks from the community, Black and brown folks, who said, we need to find an alternative response to this crisis, a response that humanizes our folks, because it is a public health issue. And addiction is not something that people want, right? And a big part of that came from all the deindustrialization of our community, right? In South Central, you had all these amazing middle-class families who could buy homes, who could live their lives in a place that was relatively safe. And it shifted when there's not jobs anymore in our communities, because where folks were able to work was shipped out, right? Mm-hmm. It was outsourced. And so folks really came together and said, we need to do something differently. We need to think about what that means. And we want to create this community coalition to really organize our community members around how we can make a difference so that it's not just punitive, it's not just law enforcement, it's not just lock them up. And they made such a difference by doing that 35 years ago. And now the organization still thrives today by doing real organizing work, by getting the community itself involved in the process of what changes that we want to see in our communities. And then we develop their leadership. So I worked at high schools in South Central to really develop the leadership of the young people to say, okay, my school it's falling apart. We need to change this. We need more resources. We need to change the funding. We need to change policies. Why are we getting suspended at higher rates than our peers? Because the policies allow for Black and brown youth, especially young men, to get in trouble for something like chewing gum. And you could just kick me out of class and kick me out of school. No, we need to change that. And so the young people would go to the school board and they do the rallies and they talk, and it was just incredible. So that's the kind of work that I did at Community Coalition as an organizer, and that what they do overall.
Well, and it sounds like totally what, this show series is about, which is about inspiration through resilience. And that's from your own probably experiences, what you saw growing up. And then now you're bringing that back to your own community, which is amazing. I think that's amazing work. And I before anything and before we end, like, I already see your future. Like, I already know you're gonna go places and you're gonna do things. And it's really exciting to see, especially in this political climate that we're in, and just like how everybody feels about just politics and politicians at this moment in time. So to hear that there's someone, actually doing that in their community and rallying up young people to do it. How do you kind of feel like the importance of that? There's not, politicians, I don't want to get too political, but, they don't really talk about that. And you talked on brown and Black. It's not just brown. It's not just Black. It's both.
It has to be.
Because we have the same experiences, and even though I didn't grow up in LA, I grew up in New York, but from what you were just saying, we had some of the same issues back then. Right. So it's great to hear that, there's this unity between both, demographics. It's not just, you're either, the Black community or just the Hispanic community. What about both, right? Power in numbers.
And I'll say two things. One is, it's not all, rainbows and butterflies.
Right, of course not.
There is work that has to be done to build that kind of solidarity. But the solidarity and the importance of it is something that at Community Coalition has been like the basis, the foundation, the values of really understanding that is what COCO does. So Mayor Bass, as a Black woman who saw this ravaging the Black community, said, yes, like, we could only organize the Black community, but in reality, this impacts everybody who lives here. The Latinos who live in our community are impacted the same way our Black folks are impacted. And so what are we gonna do about that? How are we gonna make sure that we are working together to make that happen? And so with young people, you gotta teach them young. You gotta have those conversations. And so when we do the leadership development, when we would have this leadership academy, we would go into it. We would talk about stereotypes, and we would have the young people almost like, go through the process of the like anger of like, how could you say that about my community? But also then say, well, what does that mean, and where does that come from? And why does white supremacy allow us to then, and push us to fight each other so we can fight for crumbs? And the system continues to in and of itself kind of, replicate the status quo where we don't have, and we don't have opportunity in the same way. And so a big part of that is helping our folks understand we work together. That's how we are successful. That's how we make change. That's how we see the systems actually shift. And I'll say that running for office, a big part of it was because the city council a couple years ago had these leaked recordings that were about.
I remember.
Yes, and that was
horrific to hear.
That emboldened me. Like, I was like, I've always been passionate. I've always been in the background. I've always done behind the scenes because that's who I am. But that day, like we're not playing no games. I made these shirts. They said I'm with the Blacks, and they went viral because one of the things she said was, "F him, he's with the Blacks." Talking about a Latino man who's the district attorney of this city. Like, how is that a problem when
the Black community? Wow.
And this is a justice system that's clearly impacted our Black community more than anybody, our Latinos as well. But like, for somebody to be then denigrated for that was crazy. So I went and I spoke, and folks were like, "Hey, Sade, like, you should really think about what does this mean? Next steps. Like, have you considered running?" And I'm like, that's not in my understanding of my future, but we have to have representatives who understand why it's important to bring our folks together and not divide us. because that doesn't help us. That doesn't help us get anywhere.
I think that's just, it's really powerful. It's just really powerful to hear that there's people like you out in the world that are doing what you're doing, and to kind of piggyback off of that, you were also, one of your endorsements was from Dolores Huerta, who was an American labor leader and civil rights activist who, with Cesar Chavez, is the co-founder of the United Farm Workers Association.
Yes.
That is amazing. And, knowing how farmers are being impacted, right now. I don't know how much of that you're also kind of taking into your platform, but talk to us a little bit about that and what that looks like, and hopefully for the future of farming just in this country alone.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say is Dolores Huerta is an icon, and I am so grateful for her support, for her love, and I think that my what I really appreciate about being a part of this entire process of running for office is that I get to learn so much. I get to learn from icons who, she's now in her 90s and she's still vibrant. She's vibrant. She's out all the time. I was dancing with her at a party. I was like,
but that's you're 90 and you're just not stopping.
Yeah.
And you don't care. And you're going to keep going.
And she's pushing for the right things, and she's always about it, right? And so I think the fact that she did the work to found the United Farm Workers with Cesar Chavez, and then now there are so many important pieces around. California is the 4th largest economy in the world. Yeah. And a big part of that is our agriculture, a huge part. And so what does it mean for us to be, one, protecting our farm workers themselves? Environmental policy is huge. When we think about even the ways that we protect farm workers who, we know we have an affordability crisis with housing. That impacts all of us in California, even folks who are now, we think about the migrant farmers and the ways in which we have housing that we have to continue to build and ensure that we're providing, right? We are, I think, really have to ensure that we understand that that's something that we have to do, that it's something that we are really, when we have a country that's making money off of this, it's a big basis for our economy, then it's really incumbent upon us to make that happen.
Right.
And so, the climate is changing, and it's so bad for our folks. And some, owners of the farmland don't even think that they have to provide certain protections to keep our folks out of the heat, to keep our folks protected in crazy weather. We were just here in LA in the last couple of weeks. Imagine how bad it was in the Central Valley. Right. And so
and it's hot out there anyway, just any time of year.
Exactly. And so just thinking about, our food deserts, food insecurity, all of that, I think is a huge part of what we have to understand, and how we invest in and really making sure that we're doing everything we can for farm workers to continue to be to thrive, if we want that to be a big part of our economy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think that's just, again, it's just amazing work. I can tell that you're really doing it, and to be next to someone like Dolores is amazing. And to hear that she's 90 and she's out there walking that walk still is amazing to me. And so, again, there was just a few things that I wrote down, and I was like, I want to cover all of it, and I don't even know where to start because there's so much. But you've worked with wellness centers for high schools where you created medical providers in areas where they were lacking medical providers. I think Fremont High School Wellness Center, so that neighbors and students could access mental health, reproductive, and primary care. Mental health is a huge thing. I know people are making it a big thing now. It's always been kind of a big thing. But can you talk to us a little bit more about that as well too? And kind of will that program, something like that, expand? Do you see that expanding? So how that ties into even if you become an assembly member?
Absolutely. So I'll start by saying the wellness centers on school campuses is a huge deal because a lot of our folks, we don't have access in the same way. In a place like South LA where there are not enough hospital beds, there are not enough, access to primary care physicians, we have to have these clinics. We have to have opportunities for folks to have someone that they can see more readily, for families, for undocumented immigrants and folks who aren't always, feel comfortable with the system. Schools can be a safe haven. And so making sure that that's something that's not just for the students, but the students are important, right? Thinking about birth control access. They actually have dental exam rooms there. They have opportunities, like you said, for counseling. our folks don't always know how to access. And so when it's right there, it means that we provide an ease of access. We provide opportunity for folks to get seen so that we aren't lagging behind in our health. Because a lot of our communities we're really struggling with our health. So wellness centers are huge. They actually just had an article about it, I think in the LA Times, about the importance of and how much they're popping up. St. John's is a really good example of a clinic in South LA that's actually opened up clinics at various high school campuses.
I've been to a couple.
They're amazing. St. John's is incredible. And with the wellness center at Fremont, it was actually the UMA Community Clinic who created that. And they started as medical students, Muslim medical students out of UCLA, who actually started that, I want to say maybe around 30 years ago, and decided to create, from the work that they were doing on the campus, they took that and created these clinics around South Central LA. And one of which is now at a school, which is huge. So I started there to say yes, yes, and yes. Absolutely, as an assembly member, I hope to be able to invest more. Health is huge to me, but in particular, mental health. And so, I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm a foster mom. My baby girl is 22 now, but I met her as a teenager, and she really struggled with mental health, especially, I met her and was her mentor first, but being removed from your home at a young age, at any age, is really tough. And so seeing how the schools were able to support her was really important. The organization, she was part of COCO, Community Coalition, we call it COCO. She was part of their after school program, and so they had opportunities to connect her to services as well. Through Wellness, which is an example of a mental health provider in South LA. Yeah. And for me, it's mental health specific, not just to young people who struggle, but we know that our young people are struggling. We know suicide rates are high, incredibly high, especially amongst our younger generations, but also our unhoused folks who are on the streets, who are struggling with mental illness and don't have the supports and services they need. If we're gonna get them housed, we need to get them services. If we're gonna create housing, we need to make sure there's wraparound services there. That really focus on mental illness, also substance abuse prevention, and or a lot of folks who are addicted. How do we provide not just prevention, but the treatment itself? Because so many of our folks actually turn to cope through, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and that's how the addiction starts. My cousin just passed away from a fentanyl overdose, and I know that a big part of it was that he would just do something on the weekends or whenever to try to deal with how he felt and didn't know how to really express that. For a lot of our men of color, it's considered weak to get help. And so we have to shift the narrative around mental health and supports, while also recognizing the actual treatment, the services, the access. How do we make it easier for folks? How do we make it something that is part of your health insurance and not something that you have to go in loops and jump through hoops so that you can figure it out? You know what I mean? Right. So I think all of that is hugely important to me. And post-pandemic, so many of us have been impacted post-pandemic.
So many. And it's funny, huge. I was just having a conversation about this. It's like, oh, that was pre-COVID. Oh, you mean after COVID? And it's like you see a difference in how people, but some of the things that you touched upon, a couple of things, immigration being one, especially the state of how California is in that, right, kind of way, but also, the homelessness. Yeah. Homelessness has been an issue. I live not too far from here, and has gotten bad, and so what are, how do you see that being fleshed out? And I know that as an assembly member, that's, might not be fully your scope, right? But
it's a part of it.
It's a part of it, right? But it's, it's kind of like, it's a bigger issue because we're talking about a state, right? This is statewide. There's people up north that are also dealing with the same thing. And so how do we address that? How do we attack that? I know we're all paying our taxes, we're all doing our things. So how do we really start to really see change? Because again, being from the East Coast, yes, you see homeless people, and yes, there's an issue there now, even with immigration and what that looks like. But specifically to homelessness, there was a places that people could go and sleep, every other block. Here it wasn't as much, and I don't know, what can we get on the docket? What can we do to really be like, look, that these people not only need a place to live, but like you said, the mental health is huge because most of them are addicts. I've had friends and family that are addicts and have seen them, do 12 steps, but it's because they had the access. They knew that they could, right? They had that support. They had that community support even. So, where do we see this? What can we do, right? Like, what could I do today to be like, we need more shelters?
Yeah. I think, so I'll start by saying, yes to everything you said.
And that's loaded. I know that was a lot.
Yes to everything you said. At the state level, it's actually a huge piece because a part of building more housing is that we have to change certain legislation that is barriers that provide barriers that really make it hard to build, right? For different reasons, there are certain areas, even in Los Angeles right now, they just did a zoning study. And most of Los Angeles is actually, I want to say about 70% is zoned for single family housing. And people don't want to see their communities shift. And so oftentimes you hear this like NIMBY, like not in my backyard. Like, yeah, please house the homeless. We don't want them here. Though, like, don't build the homeless housing in my backyard. Build it over there. Like, build it. And so what you end up doing is concentrating poverty in specific areas where people aren't fighting against the housing because they know the importance. Because we know in a place like South LA, we recognize how unaffordable it is. So we want there to be more housing built because then that means we can get into that housing. That means more of our folks who are on the street who probably came from South LA, a vast majority of folks who are on the streets are coming from our communities because it's no longer affordable. They're getting gentrified out. It's hard to stay in LA, period. And the fastest growing population on the streets, in addition to seniors, are single mothers, Latinas, head of households who literally just cannot no longer afford to live and pay rent in this community. And so they're living on the streets with their kids. And we're allowing that if we don't build more housing. And so the zoning study, it's about to go down because people are like, wait. We don't want to see more housing built in areas. We don't want to change these zoning laws. We love the way our community is. Right. It's a tight-knit community and people love each other and we don't want it to go too high or too, and all of that is real, but we're in a crisis. And when you're in a crisis, you have to do everything you can to address that crisis, right? And so the goal is to build, I think it's like some crazy number, like millions of homes, millions of new housing in the state of California. Okay. And I think 250,000 needs to be built in LA. Which is why they did the zoning study, because they said, well, if we're going to build 250, if the directive is we have to build this, where are we going to build it? Right. Let's figure out what the zoning is and how we can shift this. But people are fighting, and they will continue to fight. And they will say, well, if you don't vote for what we want, we'll vote you out. Right? And so then it becomes, okay, do I stand up for what's right and build housing in communities like the West Side? Or do I stand up for what my community is saying that they want? Right. And eventually, potentially not be in the seat. And so it's beautiful to see there are council members, there are folks here in LA who are like, look, I'm sorry. Like, if we allow community members to tell us when and where to build, we will never build in more affluent communities. Right. And that means we won't ever have enough housing for our folks. Yeah. But when it's a crisis, we got to do what it takes to address that. Yeah. And so I think it does take folks at the state level. It takes money from the state level. You can't have directives without the resources behind it. That's why we gotta keep getting money from the federal level, but we gotta make sure that we're holding cities accountable. Because I'm talking about LA city, because that's where I'm running. Right. But there's all these small cities around here that are like, well, actually, can you just build it over there? Push it over there. Can you just build it over here? Yeah. We don't want you can build here, but it should be more like luxury, right? And then you have all these places like in downtown LA that are literally empty, vacant, so many, like the vacancy rate is so high, and that's office buildings too. So we have to even think about rezoning and reusing, right? It's called adaptive reuse for some of these office buildings that were specifically supposed to be used for work, right? For offices. They need to become homes because we recognize that we're not coming to work anymore. Most folks are working from home remotely, and they're not going to come down to downtown to these office buildings. Then we need to really think about how we utilize that for housing too. So there's all these different, I think, bold solutions that we have to think about. There aren't enough shelters. There are shelters. There are, but there just aren't enough for what we have. And so we got to keep building. And we don't just want to build temporary shelters. We need to build permanent housing solutions for our folks, especially because we know that it's no longer affordable in LA. Right. And you know, and it's good to hear that, like, you guys are talking about it, right? Like it's there. People are aware of what needs to happen. Because sure, there might be some neighbors that are like, I don't want a shelter close by, but when you're literally smack dab in the middle of LA, what do you expect, right? So would you rather them just be on the street, right? And then just have no resources at all, and left to their own devices, and
LAPD, comes up, rolls through at 3 a.m. because somebody's being whatever in the middle of the street, or have them placed, housed somewhere, right? That they could possibly get a place to live, have a roof over their head, but also resources. I think resources is the big one.
Services, that's huge.
And there's a whole other discussion around that, not wanting curfews and there's a whole other thing there, and that's a whole other ball of wax. But I think the fact that you guys are talking about it, and seriously, there's other people talking about it, it was just great. There was another point that I saw about your mom. She organized a young Latinas she organized a group of young Latinas for the annual college and career conference, which was called Adelante Mujer Latina. And through the Latina program at Women at Work, she helped connect thousands of women every year to good paying jobs. It's from, it says it's from your mom that you learn this kind of persistence and importance of being in service. Yes. So talk to us about your mom. I mean, I know this will be kind of probably right at the tail end of Hispanic Heritage Month, and I know your mom is Guatemalteca. Yes. And tell us about that, because it sounds like she kind of rubbed off on you in that sense a little bit.
So I'll start by saying my grandmother, my mother's mother, just passed away today. Oh, and my mom, my mom is really heartbroken. So I was just checking in on her. Mm-hmm. But part of why I brought that up is because my mom is currently working on the campaign. She's a canvasser.
Nice.
She knocks on doors every single day in South Central to tell people to vote for our campaign. And her daughter.
Yeah, of course.
And first of all, my mom is so funny because she said, Mika, I will help you, but you have to pay me. I'm not about to just show up.
I was like, listen, I have a busy schedule. I have bills to pay. I have things to do.
And so she does it. She knocks on doors every single day. And yesterday, someone actually showed up at our headquarters. She said, I have to meet the daughter of the woman who showed up to my door because that woman convinced me that you are the right person for our community. But I want to know, who did she raise? I want to see what she looks like. That's what she said. Wow. And I knew my mom, I know she's out there, really putting in work because she believes in me, but I really do take after her. When I was a young person, I remember so vividly in elementary school, my dad was around much more as a kid. Mm-hmm. And my mom, she was involved in everything. She was involved, she was on the Planned Parenthood advisory board. She was on the Head Start, some type of parent liaison.
Is that a Latina mom thing? Because my mom was the same way. She was always parent teacher
whatever she could. Whatever she could. And so I didn't see her a lot as a kid. I feel because she was always doing stuff. There's more to that, right? I feel there was a lot of abuse at home. So I think my mom was the more I don't have to be at home, the better. But I think for her, it was this passion that she had to support the community. She came from Guatemala without a lot and recognized that she was going to have to figure it out. She was going to have to do something to figure out her own life, and then had 3 daughters. And she was now she wants to make sure she does the best she can for us. So sometimes she, especially when my parents weren't together, she would have to take us with her to these gala dinners where she was going to fundraise for this conference. And she'd take us and she'd leave us at the table, and I'd be like, Mommy, I hate wearing these dresses and I hate coming to these things and I get so tired, and I'd try to fall asleep. She'd be like, wake up, Mika, we're eating, but she totally was exposing us to something that I didn't understand at the time, right? I didn't understand what it meant to really be able to fundraise for the vision that we believe in for our community. So she'd shake hands with someone from, let's say, U.S. Bank, who was the liaison for government affairs, whatever, the community liaison. And she'd be like, I'm having this conference. Can you give to the conference so we can help put it on? And I remember her being like, oh, I got $50,000 tonight. I got $50,000? How you get $50,000 for a conference? How do you do that kind of stuff? And that's because she knew that she was going to be able to come back, bring it back to the community. She served folks, LA County, the Inland Empire, I want to say Antelope Valley came through, and they all came to this conference, young Latinas who knew, especially at the time, because our birth rates were incredibly high. Yep. Our high school dropout rate was incredibly high. And so there was this understanding that we need to invest in our young Latinas. And for her, that meant, I'm going to do this conference every year, in addition to what she did all the time. That was her job was career counseling for Latinas, especially recent immigrants. But in understanding too, well, what about our young Latinas who are now here, who are the daughters of those immigrants too, oftentimes. And so much of what my mom did as a young person, I've learned from. And she always laughs because she's like, Mija, I wanted you to be rich. I wanted you to go and get, you know what I mean? Like, I wanted you to be able to make money and not be, you know, doing this community work. But I'm like, Mommy, I learned it from you. And my sisters too. My youngest sister is a high school counselor at her, at the school that she went to for high school. My middle sister, she just had 2 babies, but before that, she was working on in the public defender. Yes, I love my babies. She was in the public defender's office, helping folks who were charged, making sure they had the resources. Because sometimes as soon as you get charged, I mean, it makes it tough for you to do anything, right? And so, just really grateful that my mom really laid the foundation for us as someone who just understood the importance of giving back.
It sounds like it. And, you know, there's some parallels here that I feel like exist between us. Because my mom, I don't know if that's a Latina mom thing. I don't know. But, you know, my mom being Dominican, coming to this country, I'm also first generation. And she worked as a social worker for the city of New York. So, you know, young Latinas coming through her office was a thing. And she always saw, you know, I remember one time she came home crying because she was like, there was this 15-year-old, you know, young Latina, you know, she was in the Bronx, and she was like, you know, she came in pregnant and her mother had kicked her out. And she just started, she couldn't, because she saw my face and her face, and she's like, don't you ever come home pregnant, too young, you're too young, you know. But she, you know, it touched her in the way, and she's like, that could be my daughter, right? But could I ever kick her out like that? You know, I don't think I could ever do that. But it would break her heart every day. And so, you know, so there was something always about giving back. She was always, you know, involved in like politics and like unions and, you know, working with politicians, local politicians. And so, you know, I think it's, you know, it's kind of like, I feel like, because kind of what you're talking about your mom and what I've experienced even with my mom growing up, it's like they have this, you know, this love for this country, right? They have this like, there's this opportunity, right? This hope.
Yes.
Right, to better the world in some way, even if it's just locally in your own neighborhoods and with your own community. There's something about community there, and there's something about like hope, actually instilling hope and actually being able to do something about it.
Absolutely.
Right? Because they definitely want to give us a better life. That's, you know, that's why they came here. You know, my mom says the same thing. I just want you to be rich. Like, but, and I'm like, Mom, but it's about purpose for me. I want to get these conversations out. I want to do these things. And so, you know, something I also kind of talk about here, just to kind of wrap our conversation up. There's so much that we talked about. How do you feel, you know, what's something for you that you feel makes you, or what you've learned in your life up until now that is important to be in a race of your own, right? I always talk about being in your own race, in your own lane. And sometimes we go through valleys, we go through hills, sometimes we plateau, sometimes there's tumbleweeds, right? But what to you kind of keeps you in that race of your own, to keep you kind of focused and going?
Yeah, I think, that's such a good question. I feel like I'll start by saying I was the eldest of 3 girls. And I think being a big sister was really important to me, and protecting my sisters, because I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of abuse at home. And a lot of emotional and verbal abuse. And I think recognizing as someone who just always wanted to protect and really support the folks around me, I think that's something that has stayed with me. And I think in terms of just the ways I recognize that we were then invested in, right? Like, I remember going to school as a young person, and one of my teachers, because I told you my mom was always busy, so sometimes she wouldn't come pick us up on time, and sometimes they'd have to, you know, they have to take you to the police station if your parents don't come on time. Because if your parents aren't there, they gotta go home. Like, but eventually, I think she started to say, you know, like, maybe I'll just take you with me to my house, and your parents can pick you up from there, because clearly they're like being neglectful, but also they love you and they're not doing it on purpose. And so let me see what I can do to support. And she created a good enough relationship with my parents that she started to, I think, recognize that we needed the support. And I feel like there's something so important about when you see somebody investing in you and what it means for you to then invest back into others, right? And paying it forward. And I think that's the race of my own. Like, I had so much support in school that I was able to go to Harvard. Like,
That's amazing.
I would never.
We didn't even touch. Well, I mean, I said it earlier.
Yeah,
but
like I would never have
Yeah.
imagined that as a young person. I would never have imagined that, to be able to go to Harvard. I knew I was always a smart kid. Don't get it twisted. Like, I was that kid.
Yeah.
But never enough. Like it felt so out of reach. It did. And even when I went to UCLA, my mom was like, "Mija, but you should have applied to Harvard." I'm like, "Girl, I don't even have those kind of Harvard grades." But for me, the reason I even got to UCLA was because I was a well-rounded student. My grades weren't the best, but I always gave back. I always got involved in something. I was part of the Adelante Mujer Latina Teen Advisory Board.
Yeah, nice.
I was part of all these cool things that for me was so cool, but it was really about giving back. It was really about doing something for my community. When I got to UCLA, I did the same thing. I went back to my old high school. I helped students apply because I was part of the class of 96 Black freshmen at UCLA out of a class of 4,500, less than 100 because of the impact of affirmative action. So I said, well, I want to do something. I don't want it to look like this forever. Did that. I was able to get involved I was in a Latina sorority, and our philanthropy that we did was going into the high schools and mentoring young Latinas. A part of what I did, I was a student activist. So we were fighting for more funding, right? And all of that made me who I was. So when I applied to Harvard, my grades were good, but I got a full ride to go to Harvard.
That's amazing.
Because of the work that I had done.
Yeah.
Because right? And so I think to be in a race of my own, like, I really do believe that we are put here for a purpose. And I think the fact that I was able to come back home and be introduced to Community Coalition, it was so random. I had this summer job, and my best friend, I was like, "Girl, I don't got a job. Can you help me? I know I went to Harvard, but I don't know. I'm not ready for what's next." And I found this opportunity that literally opened an entire new world for me, to start at Community Coalition, then move to the East Coast and start a brand new school, be a part of the Department of Education there, and then to come back. I feel like it is so important that, even as we experience these peaks and valleys, as we recognize that things are hard, that we ultimately are here for a purpose. And when we listen and we take the time, when we take the opportunity to really go within, that we are here for a reason, and that we do have a race that we need to keep pushing toward. And so when people say, "How's your race going? How's everything going on the campaign?" I always say, "I'm pushing hard. We're making it happen, but we need your support." Because we can't do it without the support of everybody else. I am not running by myself, and I'm not running for myself. I'm running for our community. I'm running with our community, and our community shows up. We had over 100 folks knocking on doors with me a couple weeks ago.
That's amazing.
Right? And I'll say, like, the last thing, a really good example of what I'm saying. So we have amazing folks who are on our campaign. Our volunteers are so dope. And one example in particular is we had one of my mentees. So I talked about being an organizer. I also trained organizers. That was what I did when I came back to the organization. And he had spent 17 years in prison, and now he works for the mayor's office.
Wow.
Incredible young man. He's a little older, but young in the sense of, like, he's just great.
Yeah.
Yes, and he said, "Look, Sade, I work for the mayor, and she's working me hard. I can't help you, but I'm gonna bring somebody, and he's gonna help you. But look, I'm gonna introduce you to him. He spent 24 years in prison. He just got out 2 weeks ago, and he wants to help. He's ready to help. He was doing the work behind bars, and he's ready now. Amazing. But he's never done this. So I want you to really take him under your wing." I took him with me. We knocked on some doors. It was amazing. Like, he was in it with me. He was, like, sharing his story, being the son of a single mom, and how he ended up on the wrong path, and why we need representatives that really support folks, right? And then he was like, loved it so much, he went back to his transitional home, and he told his homie, Adonai, he was like, "Yo, you should go get involved in this campaign. You'll like it. It'll be dope." He comes, he spent 30 years in prison, and he had been out for 3 weeks. And he actually had just come from church, so he was a little late. So they brought him directly to me while I was knocking on doors. And I was like, "Nice to meet you. We're knocking on these doors. I don't have time to train you, but you're going to learn along the way." Right. And he was in it, and he loved it so much. He has not left our campaign. He is doing everything. He supports me with fundraising. He helps us do research. He's knocked on doors. He's done outreach. He's outreach to other guys. He went and brought 10 more guys who are former lifers, because he knows that it's legislation that allowed him to get out of prison. He thought he was going to be there forever. He was 16 years old when he went to prison. Wow. And he never thought he would get out. And the only reason he got out is because of folks in the state legislature who said, "How are we putting 16-year-olds away forever, for life?" Right. They need to have their cases reviewed, because at 16, your brain is not fully developed. Right. And you deserve to have an opportunity.
You're a baby
to see if you've been rehabilitated in your time in prison. you should have an opportunity to get out. Yeah. And that's why. And he's like, Sade, you get to be a champion for me if you win. And so I want to make sure you win.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing.
Thank
And
you.
that's really like, I think it's what you're bringing to the table, right? It's what you're bringing to the race, so to speak, so that people are jumping on your race, literally, like kind of literally and kind of hypothetically here, but like are actually jumping onto your race because of the energy you're exuding, because you're really saying these words, but you really mean it because you live it, and you've been living it for a long time. So I just really appreciate having you here. I think you're gonna win, but that's just me.
We gonna win. We gotta claim it. This is manifesting.
Claim it, manifest it.
It's my purpose. That means I'm put here.
So I think you're gonna do great, and even if you don't, I still see a really bright future for you.
Thank you.
For this city, hopefully for this state, and bigger.
Thank you.
So congratulations on everything, and congratulations on everything that you've done. And so this is another episode of A Race in Your Own. I'm Virgie Rodriguez. Don't forget to subscribe.